All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to San Jose State's SAA Student Chapter, our March event. We have a speaker, Christine Kim, who's going to be sharing about the California Digital Library. When we were sort of polling our members about what the interests were, the big thing that came up was digital collections. Just about that was one of the things people were pretty unanimous on is digital collections. And one that I have used the most is um, the Online Archive of California and Calisphere. So I wanted to reach out to Christine Kim, who is an SJSU alumni. I
Thanks
go to
so
my
much.
slides. um, so just a reminder for everyone, um, to preserve our bandwidth, please mute your mic, turn off your video. Go ahead and ask questions in the chat as we're going along, and there will be question and answer at the end. And then we'll be posting the recording to our YouTube channel. And with that, I will turn it over to Christine. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much. I'm just gonna grab the screen share. And hi, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you all for your March event. And I'm really excited to share more about the services I support, the Online Archive of California and Calisphere. Quick introduction. My name is Christine Kim. I am the OAC Calisphere Service and Outreach Manager at the California Digital Library. I've been in this role for a little over 4 years now. And as Katrina mentioned, I am an alum of San Jose State University. I completed the program in 2011, so a little bit over 10 years ago, and it was a great program to go through. So I'm excited to be with you all this evening. So just for a quick bit of background, I was hearing that folks are interested in learning more about the California Digital Library. So the CDL is part of the University of California system, and we're a system-wide entity. We work really closely with the 10 UC campuses, but we're not tied to any specific library or campus. So the CDL has several program areas with wide-ranging services that include scholarly publishing, data curation, system-wide licensing, just as a few examples. And many of these are system-wide services that support the UC campus libraries, but we also offer a lot of services beyond what the campus libraries are utilizing. So I'm in the publishing, archives, and digitization team, and specifically focusing on supporting the archive services within that team. So this presentation is going to focus mostly on the services that we have to support discoverability of unique archival collections in California. And I'll be sharing overviews of the Online Archive of California as well as Calisphere Services, both of which are examples in which we work with libraries, archives, and museums beyond the 10 UC campuses. And we provide these aggregations that are freely available to the public as part of our public service mission. And so researchers can discover primary source materials in two major ways. And the first is through finding aids, which essentially offers detailed descriptions and inventories of primary source collections, including materials that are found in those collections, such as photographs, manuscripts, papers, scrapbooks, and so on. And these descriptions include information about how to access and use physical collections on site. And the second is through digital content, which includes things like scans of photographs, paintings, writings, and more. Digital content can be made available online, enabling researchers to access and view the collections from anywhere. So the OAC and Calisphere are complementary services that we support. OAC primarily as a system for finding aids and description, and Calisphere as our service for aggregating digital collections. And these services are freely available to provide broad statewide access and aggregation. And there's quite a bit of overlap in contributors from across the state. So as for this session, we'll begin with brief overviews of both OAC and Calisphere, and then later dive into considerations to supporting a more representative and inclusive aggregation. Calisphere is our service that aggregates digital collections, which includes unique and historically important artifacts from the University of California and other educational and cultural heritage institutions across the state. In Calisphere, you can explore early maps of the world, photographs from historical newspapers, paintings reflecting periods of cultural significance, personal journals and diaries charting new frontiers, political posters calling for decades of social and political change, oral histories and interviews with community members throughout California, and more. And these materials are not limited by subject or scope. That said, the collection is particularly strong in US and California history, due largely in part of the collection emphases of the contributing partner organizations in California that we work with. So Calisphere was launched in 2006 and is primarily developed and hosted by the California Digital Library. However, the collections are owned and have been contributed by all 10 UC campus libraries, as well as many other cultural heritage institutions across California. Our statewide partners consist of public libraries, as well as academic libraries, museums, historical societies, and many other cultural heritage organizations. And we currently work with over 300 contributing partners who all help shape Calisphere as a valuable public resource for teaching and learning. In 2016, we redesigned our submissions process to be more accessible for smaller institutions. And since then, we've continued to see steady and rapid growth, not only adding new contributors, but more content as well. In early 2018, we hit a milestone of 1 million objects available for discovery in Calisphere. And in 2021, we exceeded over 2 million digital primary resources in Calisphere. As for types of formats, most of these are images, but there are also increasingly a number of texts, videos, sound files, and data sets as well. So you can search the site by entering keywords or browse collections contributed by particular contributors. And so here's the landing page for the San Jose State University Special Collections and Archives collections. There's a brief description about their repository up at the top, including their contact information, followed by a list of collections that they've currently have made available in digital formats. When we select a collection, we'll see a browsable thumbnail listing of the contents in the collection, as well as some specific information about the collection as a whole. You also have options to further refine the results to filter by item type or decade. And when you select an item, excuse me, you will see the digital item displayed front and center. And then you can also scroll down to find that the item is accompanied by several brief descriptions. These descriptions include information about the collection or the object and is presented as factual information. The descriptions are part of the Creative Commons public domain, a CC0, which removes all restrictions on the use of the metadata that describes these cultural works. Note that this CC0 only applies to the description and not the digital object content, since those files have their own copyright. So the CC0 doesn't apply to the actual content file. Coming back to the top part of the item record, there are several key features I'd also like to point out. The first feature is that Calisphere makes it easy for users to cite the item in view. If researchers are interested in including a reference to this object, they can select the Get Citation button, which will pop out a window that includes all the essential information that can be included in a citation. The second feature to highlight is that we try to make it easy to contact the contributing institution directly. If, for instance, a researcher is in need of a high-quality copy, they can select the Contact Owner button to find information about getting in touch with the contributor. Third, there's a link just below the image that says View Source on the contributor's website, and users can select this link, which will, in this example, take you to view the image on the San Jose State University's Digital Collections website. So SJSU uses Islandora to manage and publish their digital collections. Calisphere is based on a harvest model where we pull in metadata that points to content hosted in the contributor's own digital collection system. This requires some initial setup at the beginning, but once the process is in place, we can easily grab new collections and pick up changes and additions to existing collections. We work with contributors to confirm which collections they'd like to publish in Calisphere and always conduct test harvests to preview and quality check the collections. Once everything looks okay in our testing environment, we'll ask for approval from the contributor before publishing the records in Calisphere. Most contributors have found our harvest process to be quick and easy, and we've been able to partner with cultural heritage organizations of varying capacity, resources, and practices. However, we do have a few basic requirements that guide our harvesting process. One key factor is that the collections are already published online, including publication of a cataloging or metadata record, along with a way for users to view the file, such as the image or audio or video recording, as demonstrated by the SJSU's Islandora example in the previous slide. And in line with this, one of our requirements is that the system contributors work with also needs to support options to programmatically share the digital collections. Our contributors typically use a digital collections management system, such as PastPerfect, ContentDM, Omeka, or Islandora, to manage their digital items and metadata. But we can also harvest from a platform that hosts digital items, such as YouTube or Flickr. DPLA, the Digital Public Library of America, is another venue in which users are able to discover digital collections. Calisphere is a DPLA hub, which means that we send all the data in Calisphere up to DPLA. Our statewide partners are able to easily contribute to both the statewide and the national aggregations at the same time. DPLA works just like Calisphere. They harvest collections from other statewide aggregators like us, just as we harvest collections from our contributors in California. And like Calisphere, it can help drive more user traffic back to your digital collections platform. And if a user finds an item in DPLA and wants to see it in more detail, DPLA refers the users back to the original source of the harvest, in which this case, it would be back to SJSU's digital collections website. As mentioned earlier, researchers can discover primary source materials in two major ways, and Calisphere is a service for aggregating digital collections. And so the digital content that you'll find in Calisphere really only represents a small fraction of primary source materials. As you already know, most collections haven't yet been scanned or digitized. OAC, the Online Archive of California, is our service for aggregating finding aids across the state, allowing users to discover, identify, and understand primary resources, many of which are not yet available online. It's a long-standing service provided by the CDL, launched in 1998. Any library, archive, museum, or other cultural heritage institution can freely publish their finding aids or collection guides directly into the OAC. Currently, over 300 institutions contribute finding aids to the OAC, with over 55,000 finding aids available. Every year, we onboard about 10 new contributors and publish around 2,000 new finding aids on average. So finding aids are front and center in the OAC, and this is a browsable listing of finding aids submitted by the San Jose State University's Special Collections and Archives. We host finding aids in a few different formats, and the primary format of finding aid is an EAD, encoded archival description, and we're hosting XML files contributed by our membership. EAD is an international archival encoding standard, which can be used to format finding aids. And so what we're looking at here is a published EAD finding aid, and you can see an overview of the collection in the center, as well as on the right-hand table of contents, you can use that to drill down into the inventory. Many contributors are using systems like ArchiveSpace but in some cases, they may be using a homegrown system to create EAD files. And in cases where contributors do not have a system for creating EAD files, we have a freebie web form called Record Express that can be used to create collection level records and then optionally attach PDF inventories. I also wanted to note that we support a couple of integrations between OAC and other platforms and services. A few key ones to call out: contributors can opt in to share their OAC finding aids with the OCLC's Archive Grid service. Archive Grid is sort of like a DPLA for finding aids, but international in scope. Archive Grid harvests and indexes finding aid data so that users can discover collections through Archive Grid. But in order to view the finding aid in detail, Archive Grid routes users back to where they found the information in the first place. And so in our case, it would route users back to the OAC. We also have an integration with OAC finding aids and Aon if contributors opt to utilize that service. Aon is a licensed product that some of our contributors use to manage patron requests, such as photo duplication requests or paging boxes of archival materials for use in a reading room. This helps researchers submit requests to directly through the Aon pipeline. So in all, aggregation aims to increase discoverability of the unique historical records and resources that are stewarded by cultural heritage organizations in California. By viewing usage statistics, we're able to gain some insight on how usage has grown over the years. Calisphere's total item record page views has grown every year, with the exception of 2019, in which Google Analytics was dropping some of our page view counts, so it was not fully counting. And OAC's finding aid views also demonstrates increased usage every year, though the available data has been truncated by Google Analytics. In general, though, we've observed that our total usage stats trend up every year. And so with researchers in mind as our primary audience, we recently published a statement of context and principles in both of our service websites. And in these statements, we explicitly wanted to share a statement that introduces the historical materials found in both Calisphere and OAC. And these pages articulate our shared commitments, values, and community practices that guide us and our contributing partner organizations in providing core context for how and why historical resources are made available in Calisphere, as well as finding aids in OAC, acknowledging historic and ongoing biases in metadata and primary sources, as well as our commitment to support responsible practices, and offering clear pathways for users to share relevant information about the primary sources and historical records in both Calisphere and OAC. So some goals and main sections of each of these statements include providing context about Calisphere and OAC as web resources, as well as detailing our partnership with cultural heritage organizations in California, articulating our commitment to provide access to primary sources and historical evidence, offering transparency about how historical materials are stewarded, described, and made available on the open web, acknowledging biases and committing to support a broad representation of perspectives, and outlining communication pathways to include how users can share information and what would happen with that information once they submit it. These pages answer fundamental questions such as, how did these historical records end up online? Why is it online? And who described them and made them available? Alongside that, both Calisphere and OAC reflect steady growth as record counts grow over the years. Currently, there are over 2 million records in Calisphere and over 40,000 EAD finding aids in OAC. I think there are 55,000 collection guides, 40,000 of them are in EAD format, and they're both from over 300 contributors. Beyond these data points, we wonder how aggregation can be more inclusive. How can we ensure that aggregation is representative of diverse perspectives, and in particular, surfacing those of historically excluded communities? So some big questions we have include examining who is participating in aggregation services, such as academic archives, public libraries, or whether community-based archives are able to participate. Identifying existing structural barriers that prohibit smaller organizations, such as community-centered archives. For example, are there any technical expectations or resources that serve as barriers? Analyzing aggregation policy requirements and how it might impact smaller organizations. For instance, aggregation currently requires that records are made publicly available, but are there records that require mediated access? So in short, something we've been very interested in better understanding is who is telling the story in these aggregations and whose perspectives are these records privileging, and how does aggregation influence the historical record? So we have a responsibility to support a broad, diverse representation of perspectives and narratives through the historical documents and resources discoverable in our aggregation. So in an effort to better understand who is participating and contributing in aggregation services, as well as to identify crucial opportunities to support those who are not, we're embarking on a couple of assessment projects that we are exploring, along with some colleagues over at UC Irvine. Rooted in identifying actionable strategies to support ethical and responsible representation of marginalized histories are two projects question. How can regional and national digital collection aggregators, such as DPLA, regional aggregators participating in the DPLA Hubs network, and other regional aggregators work towards a more representative and inclusive aggregation? And what is a responsible and inclusive digital exhibition framework that may amplify historically marginalized narratives? We're looking forward to the research and findings surfaced through these assessment projects to not only gain headway on these particular roadmap priorities, but also particularly help our services to grow in a more inclusive and representative way and support community-centered archives. So these assessments are conducted as part of UC Irvine's Mellon-funded project called Community-Centered Archives Practice, Transforming Education, Archives, and Community History, or called CCAP Teach for short. CCAP Teach is a 4-year project that will cultivate commitment among higher education institutions to community-centered archives approaches, simultaneously solidifying the ability and responsibility of academic libraries to engage critically and contribute to social justice-focused scholarship, training, pedagogy, and partnerships in their communities. As part of this, CDL will be working with UC Irvine to conduct 2 research and assessment projects to explore opportunities to grow our services and to support more inclusive and broad representation and share stories responsibly. So just a little bit more on each of these projects. The first area of investigation explores opportunities for regional and national digital collection aggregators to evolve service models, as well as the gaps in current service models, with a goal to more directly support community-centered archives and other organizations beyond the academic and public library sectors. This assessment would be conducted at the national level by exploring the DPLA aggregation, which includes Calisphere, as well as the represented DPLA hubs. We've started to work on this assessment with the Connecticut Digital Archive team. The CTDA is part of the Digital Preservation Repository program at the University of Connecticut, serving the state of Connecticut with the wide range of digital resources. And like Calisphere, the CTDA is a regional aggregator that contributes to DPLA. So CTDA published a white paper last year called CTDA in Context, addressing systemic challenges in the Connecticut Digital Archive, which explores the challenges in social power dynamics in their digital collections. And following this publication, we engaged in several conversations with the CTDA team to info share and get to know the research and initiatives happening across our services. And I actually have a link that I wanted to drop in the chat about this. Here we go. And so alongside with our colleagues at the CTDA as well as UC Irvine, the assessment work is underway. And this assessment will culminate with a report that analyzes the composition of cultural heritage organizations currently represented in aggregations, identify gaps in organizational representation within aggregations, and recommend strategies and action plans that can support the needs of community-centered archives and other organizations while mitigating barriers to participating in aggregations. And we're really looking forward to the findings from this research to incorporate these findings to enhance the OAC Calisphere service and participation model to support community-centered archives. And the second assessment project involves digital exhibitions. This assessment proposes to explore the creation of sustainable digital exhibition curation and development models to amplify the voices of historically excluded perspectives and also serve as resources for social justice and ethnic studies curricula. We're interested in conducting this assessment work to explore exhibition models that can not only responsibly surface community stories, but also developed with short-term curation and long-term sustainability in mind. This assessment project will culminate in a shareable toolkit that can be readily adapted by practitioners to be utilized beyond the Calisphere exhibitions framework. We aim to outline practical approaches and considerations to developing digital exhibitions and summarize responsible practices for presenting research resources within the content of these exhibitions. And along with colleagues at UC Irvine, we've wrapped up conversations with potential consultants and are currently finalizing the onboarding process. And we're anticipating beginning this assessment project next month in April. So these assessment projects and their deliverables are situated within the CCAP Teach project, and our approach will embody these principles of community-centered archives partnerships. We believe there are pathways to explore digital collections, aggregations, and exhibition development strategies that are collaborative through shared authority with community members, while being attentive to inequities reflected in archives and exhibitions, be responsive and sensitive to the community's needs, and engage with the divergent priorities of communities. We also thank our colleagues at UC Irvine who reached out to us at CDL to consider opportunities to gain headway on some of our key roadmap priorities, particularly those that resonate clearly with community-centered archives. And if you're interested in other initiatives and activities we're involved in growing both OAC and Calisphere, we have publicly available roadmaps that reflect our ongoing goals and priorities. And you can find them through our Contributor Help Center. There's a link on this slide. And our roadmaps include work that we want to do in terms of new features or significant maintenance tasks, major projects, as well as substantial areas of research and development. We're using Trello to manage our roadmaps, with tasks and activities described in cards. And we indicate the status of any given card by moving cards right to left as work progresses. Any roadmap items listed within the in progress list indicates that active work is happening. And feel free to reach out if you'd like additional information about our other development activities. We also maintain a contributor help center, which we use to share documentation and resources about OAC and Calisphere. It includes information that will help new contributors get started, as well as documentation about OAC and Calisphere. Feel free to explore our documentation to learn more about contributing. And that's, I think, the end of what I had prepared, but my email is available, and if you'd like to reach out or contact me, please feel free to do so. And yeah, if folks have any questions, or if folks wanted to share any thoughts, I'd be really happy to hear from you all.
Thank you so much. If people are having, if anyone has questions, feel free to turn on your mic and jump in. I'm so glad that it's like active work towards community representation. And I think the thinking through like the technology discrepancies between a smaller archive and a really well-funded one is super important. That's one of my questions was, have there been times that you couldn't partner with an institution because of that sort of disparity?
So I think, yeah, in terms of partnerships go, anyone who's interested in being a contributing partner, we can bring them on board, but there are definitely technical limitations that prevent the actual sharing of resources. And so starting with the OAC's big dependency with submitting EAD finding aids is that folks will need some type of tool that will support creating those EAD files. And that requires standing up something like ArchiveSpace, which isn't as easy as it sounds. It requires some type of hosting capability of setting that all up. So that can be, I think, a bigger task than it might sound. What we've been able to do on the OAC, though, is we have a freebie web form tool called Record Express that, that works on our contributor dashboard. There's like a web form, and folks are able to create at least a very high level collection level finding aid. And then on our system in the back, it like generates this EAD file. And so that's kind of one way we've been able to support folks who are unable to stand up like an EAD finding aid type of tool. As for Calisphere, I think it gets a little bit more challenging. So our big requirement in participating in Calisphere is that, you know, these digital materials need to be stewarded and described and managed and then published on your own digital collections platform. So that requires standing up some type of digital asset management system, and those are kind of hefty tools in themselves. And that can be a bit more challenging in terms of technical and resource intensiveness. One workaround we've been able to kind of explore is that we are able to harvest from resources like YouTube and Flickr, although those aren't really ideal tools that archivists want to use in terms of maintaining kind of the long-term like stewardship of archival materials. They're really just publication tools, but that's just been a workaround we've been able to work on. And so
more
there are
user-friendly.
definitely right. And they're just ready to go. So there are definitely like existing technical barriers and we've been able to navigate workarounds, but they're not like ideal workarounds. And so I think a big goal of these assessment projects is to really surface what explicitly those challenges are, and then try to work towards how can we address those challenges and where can we support folks where they need. And I saw in the chat that someone dropped in a link to the CCAP Teach Project Coordinator gig. If anyone's interested, it is also a remote position. I believe it's a part-time role, so might be perfect if you're a very busy student, which I think you all are very busy.
Okay, we had a question come in. Yeah, what did your career path to this job look like? Or were there particular classes that helped you prepare for this job?
That's a great question. In terms of classes, I think when I was a student, I kind of just took any class that I thought was interesting. I did take the archives class and I thought that was super interesting, but I think the one that really kind of set me in the direction I ended up going in is the internship class. And I think I had initially picked up an internship gig with the folks at UC Irvine. And that's kind of where I started really learning about archives. You know, I processed my first collection, really met a lot of just like, they were all working on very interesting things to try to make the collections more discoverable. And that was, I think, what really set me up in terms of my interest in kind of growing in this direction. I initially had an internship where I processed my first collection. I actually continued to intern with them even after that initial internship. And you know, this was like over 10 years ago, but one of the most interesting things I worked on was web archiving, which back then was like less of a thing than it is now. But I was just really just amazed in the just technical creativity that was happening. I didn't really understand that the internet was being archived at that point, and I just thought it was just so fascinating, and that there was active research and development happening, also just growing with like new formats that were you know, beyond like paper-based formats, new formats that, you know, had to be considered. And I thought it was so interesting that archives practices had to grow along with that.
How do you stay on top of all of the new formats? It's just
Yeah,
constantly changing.
yeah. It's hard. It's hard to stay on top of all of the formats. I think one big way is having a broad network of colleagues. I think everyone's working on so many different and cool things. So I think having, you know, touch points with colleagues, colleagues that you've worked with in the past, or colleagues that you might meet within, you know, like SAA, I think is a great way to really learn about what's happening outside of your immediate like sphere. And I think just having conversations. Another great way is, I think, attending conferences. You get to really hear about what other folks are working on, and then get a really great demo on things that have worked for them.
Going back to internships for a minute, will the CCAP Teach have any intern opportunities?
I'm not really sure if there will be internship opportunities, and I think that might be a good question for our colleagues over at UC Irvine.
Mm-hmm.
As part of CCAP Teach, though, one of the biggest goals is to bring teaching opportunities for the undergraduate classes at UC Irvine. So there's a lot of teaching that's happening to the student community to really think about like the ethnic studies and community-centered archives approaches with them. I see a question in the chat about becoming a certified digital archivist. I don't actually have an opinion on this. I am not a certified digital archivist, and so I can't have a really strong opinion or recommendation either way. I've taken a couple of courses. And I think in terms of, I think born digital formats is just this big, wild west of formats. And I think there's a lot there in terms of tools, learning the tools, and even having tools to navigate how to preserve born digital formats and process born digital formats. So I definitely think that's something that, taking those digital archives, like certification courses, would be helpful in. I also believe there's like a testing component at the end. So I haven't completed that process.
One thing that you said, we've heard a couple of times from different presenters, is that once you had some experience with processing was when more opportunities opened up. I don't really have a question about that. It was just like, interesting.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, I think, and maybe it's like on the scale of investment. I did find that, once someone took the time to train me on processing, and once they felt like they could trust me, I found that they like wanted to keep me on board as an intern. And then that kind of, like just being there, just being present and kind of just being around, I think folks just got used to having me there. And I just kept getting asked to work on more projects. And I think that really just kind of being able to gain more experience in that way was really, really instrumental. And then I think that definitely was like how things really started to unfold. So definitely, yeah, if processing is something that you're interested in, it's also just really fun. I just think processing a collection of records that it's a collection of someone's like life work, and just kind of going through the papers and describing it and trying to make it something that other folks are able to kind of dig through. And I don't know, it's a very intimate experience. You really get to know a lot about that person. You do a lot of research on that person. And yeah, one of the collections I worked on when I was an intern, it was the papers, the research files of Professor Rowland, Professor F. Sherwood Rowland. And he's a former professor and founding chemistry department faculty at UC Irvine. And he's actually a Nobel Prize winner. He discovered what was causing the ozone layer to deplete. And there are these like things called chlorofluorocarbons. And I don't have a science background at all. Like I took chemistry in high school, but I was just so fascinated about Professor Rowland's research, and all of this research took place in like the 70s, 80s, and once he made his discovery along with two other scientists, it was this huge battle to convince people and the political agenda that there was this thing that was destroying the earth. And it was kind of maybe my first real insight into the battle with climate change that has been ongoing. And so I think, kind of getting back to the point, I think processing collections is just a really interesting way to look at just things that have happened in history, and become a fan of someone's work that you may not have otherwise known anything about.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to be able to, like, what are some of the things that you have some expertise in now that you never would have thought to explore otherwise? Like through processing, yeah.
So I think I don't get to do as much processing now, which is a bummer, but I do a lot of kind of browsing. And so that's been really interesting to really touch base on. I think an interesting kind of angle on where I think both OAC and Calisphere services are situated is that we partner with organizations, and we kind of really lean on these partnerships and see our contributing partners as like the experts in particular domains. And I think in that end, if we receive like user inquiries, or like if folks report like or want to share additional information about the metadata or description, we always forward that over to contributors because they're the experts in that area. But yeah, I think, that's a tough question. I think back when I was processing more collections, I think I was absorbing more kind of like trivia type information. So any current favorite collections you'd recommend we check out? I think I really appreciate a lot of I know UC Irvine's collections really well just because I spent so much time there as an intern, but I also worked there. And I think one of the most kind of important collecting areas and kind of works that I was always fascinated about was at UC Irvine, there's the Southeast Asian Archive. And so that archive is really focused on documenting the experiences of folks, of refugees, essentially, after the Vietnam War. So it's not focused on the Vietnam War, it's focused on the experiences of those impacted by war and after the war. And so following the war, there are folks who had to escape that region and were refugees. So there are a lot of really incredible collections that UC Irvine has really documented. And in particular, I just think the artwork collections are really significant. So following the war, there were folks who were living in refugee camps, and they had been distributed like art supplies. And so there are folks who were living in refugee camps and creating art. And a lot of the art really represents these images of what it was like to live in these camps, as well as what kind of they would aspire to be doing outside of the camps. So I just think those paintings are really powerful, and that's something I definitely recommend exploring. There are some digital collections up on Calisphere actually, and maybe I can find a link that I can drop in for you all.
If anyone else has any questions, you want to unmute or add it in the chat. We've got just a few minutes left.
Here's actually an exhibition that ended up getting curated on Calisphere, drawing from a lot of the art.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your presentation.
Sure, absolutely. It does seem like you all have another event that you're all, yeah, thanks so much for having me today. And I really appreciate that you all took the time to learn more about the services that I support. It was really great to see all of you. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And yeah, I'd look forward to seeing you all. I do want to give a quick plug for I know you're all involved in SAA, but I was curious if any of you are involved in SCA, the Society of California Archivists, which is like the California network of archivists. And yeah, I would just encourage you all to check that out if you're all interested. If you're in California and have interest in like getting to know folks in California, there's a conference. The annual conference is coming up in early April in Sacramento. So yeah, if any of you are there, please feel free to let me know. I'd love to meet you or see you.
That's great. Our club is going to have a poster, so I'll have to look for you.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll definitely swing by the poster.
Before we all head out, we do have a tentative rescheduled date for our Brenda Gunn event. Look for that at the end of March. And then we're going to have some of our members talk about their conference experience and what is the process for submitting a poster, presenting at a conference, or just attending. And some more about Archaeota. There is a chance to publish if you submit your work to the email address there. We are accepting submissions now. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Christine Kim, for being here, for sharing your time and your expertise. And thank you, everyone, for attending.